Hello everyone, welcome to the second part of our Navigating Conflict and Crucial Conversations training. Prior to jumping into the second part of the training, you will need to complete the Conflict Styles Assessment. If you haven't done so already, please take a moment to do so now. This presentation will review the 5 different patterns of responding to conflict, and it will look at the strengths and challenges of each approach. This presentation will also provide general tips that you can use when responding to conflict in your organization. There are 5 common patterns for responding to conflict. Each person responds to conflict differently. Some like to approach it head on, some would prefer to ignore it until it goes away, while others fall somewhere in between. Understanding your personal pattern of responding to conflict will help you navigate challenging situations, as it will help you determine if your go-to approach is the best one for the situation, and if not, it will allow you to push yourself to approach conflict differently. It's also helpful to understand the different conflict styles, as it can help you better understand others who may not naturally approach conflict in the same way you do. In the next section, we will review each type of conflict. As we go through each type, we encourage you to reflect on your assessment results, whether you agree with them or not, as a lens through which to understand the various approaches and how they may impact your leadership. The first approach to conflict that we will review is avoidance. People who practice avoidance tend to step away from conflicts when they arise. They would rather keep their opinions to themselves to avoid escalating a conflict. At times, avoiders will try to solve a problem by denying its existence or maintaining the status quo. People who practice avoidance are often admired for having a calm, quiet presence during a conflict or a crisis. However, these people tend to keep their feelings bottled up and will often ignore their personal feelings or needs during a conflict. Avoidance is an appropriate technique to use when an issue isn't very important or when it's not the right time to address the issue. This approach is not the best to use when an issue is important. It's also not a good strategy when an issue will not go away without being addressed. Next, we'll talk about accommodation. People who practice accommodation will often go along with someone else's wishes, regardless of personal needs. People often ignore their own needs because the most important aspect for an accommodator is to maintain a relationship or to build a relationship. The accommodator will most likely not want to bother anyone with their opinion. Instead, they will focus on supporting others in a conflict situation, and they are adept at placating people in uncomfortable situations. The strengths of accommodators are that they have a harmonizing approach to conflict. Accommodators often gain strong appreciation from others involved in a conflict because of this quality. However, accommodators may build up resentment from denying their own needs. It also may be difficult for those who want to get to the root of the problem to work with accommodators because they're so focused on making others happy. Accommodation is an important technique to use when an issue is unimportant, when the timing is wrong, or when a cooling off period is needed. It's also a good approach when the relationship is more important than the issue. Accommodation isn't a good tool to use when the issue is more important than the relationship, or when others are ready and willing to deal with the issue. Next up, we have competition. Competitors are known for being persuasive and direct. They know the result that they want in a conflict situation, and they'll go for it. For competitors, relationships aren't as important as whatever goal they are pursuing. Some of the strengths of this approach to conflict are competitors are good at making quick decisions and they don't waste a lot of time, which can be helpful in a crisis situation. Competitors also tend to be passionate about their views and they're dedicated to pursuing their convictions. However, competitors sometimes will ignore other people's feelings when taking action or making a decision, which can lead to hurt feelings and unequal relationships. Competition is an appropriate style to use when a quick or decisive action is needed, such as when safety is at stake or when speed is more important than the relationship. This is also a helpful approach when an unpopular decision must be made and consensus among people is unlikely. Finally, this approach is appropriate if one person has expertise on a subject and others don't have that knowledge or experience. On the flip side, this approach is inappropriate to use when understanding people's needs is important to relationships or future collaboration. It's also not the best approach when building relationships is more important than speed. Next, we have compromise. Compromisers will try to find solutions that work well for all parties involved. Compromisers tend to think about what they're willing to give up and what they're willing to hold on to, and they try to gear their communication to focus on this give and take for all parties in order to find a solution that everyone can agree on. The strength of compromise is that compromisers often want to work together and cooperate to find a solution to a problem. This approach can be completed quickly when all parties are engaged. If done well, all parties will feel listened to and will walk away with a sense of accomplishment. Unfortunately, there are times in which compromise just isn't possible. In some cases, this may be related to policies or processes, for example, when you can't change the rules, or other structural factors. Compromise is an appropriate approach to take when all parties are willing to work together and negotiate, and when parties have relatively equal power. It's also an appropriate approach when there are several solutions that the group can consider when approaching the problem. It's not the best approach to use when people are unlikely to commit to solutions or when people have unrealistic expectations of what can be accomplished. Lastly, we're going to review collaboration and problem solving. Collaborators tend to want to discuss all the details of a problem and work through them together so that everyone gets what they want and is happy in the end. In collaboration, all parties are willing to work towards a win-win solution or a solution that's acceptable to everyone. This approach focuses on maintaining and strengthening relationships. Some strengths of this approach are that collaborators will often build high levels of trust and mutual understanding with those they are working with. They also tend to build strong teams since there is focus on working as a unit. Because there are a lot of individuals approaching a problem in collaboration, there's a lot of potential for creative problem solving, as more people means more creative ideas. One challenge of collaboration is time. This process takes a lot of time and energy for everyone involved. At times, collaboration can lead people to feeling like they've talked about a problem for a long time without finding a solution, which can lead to burnout. Collaboration is an appropriate method to use when it's important to gain buy-in from your team. It's also a good approach to use when an issue is too important for compromise. This approach is helpful when you want to get multiple perspectives on a topic. Finally, this approach is the most appropriate to use when you have a lot of time to work through the issue at hand. On the flip side, this approach is not the best when you have time constraints or when parties aren't committed to putting in the time to find collaborative solutions. We encourage you to keep the 5 patterns of responding to conflict in mind next time you're approaching a problem or a challenge so you can reflect on your go-to approach and whether or not it's the most appropriate for the situation. As a reminder, different approaches will work well for different situations, and there isn't one right or wrong approach. We also hope that this information will give you perspective next time you're approaching a conflict, as identifying the different approaches people are taking to respond to the conflict can help you get your bearing as you seek a solution. If you have any questions about the content covered in this presentation, please reach out to our office by emailing usdinvolvement@gmail.com.